Hello, James McQuibby here. It's been a number of weeks since I have been able to post. One reason is, as you can kind of see through there, is it's winter finally came to Boston. We had a crazy warm January. I was able to be out on the range in relatively dry, not icy or muddy conditions all through the end of the month. But I also mentioned last time that I have since been working on a couple of workshops that were sponsored by the National Park Service on what is called Battle Road, the road between Lexington and Concord. These workshops were sponsored by the National Park Service, hosted by a gentleman named Henry Cooke, who is really the guy who understands the late 1700s period of attire, fashion, what men who were on Battle Road on April 19th, 1775 would have been wearing, as well as what the British would have been wearing. It was just a real treat to work with him over multiple weekends. And I'm excited to share with you how far I've got. Now, you know, if you looked carefully, my last several months of videos have all been about preparing my musket, learning a little bit about guns, a little bit about the history of the musket, gun culture, and so on. It's been a great journey. But in trying to come up with a name for what I call this channel, I don't really think this is a channel. I'm not someone who's trying to have a YouTube career. I called myself Man About History because I feel like that's what this is really about for me. And that is one of the questions in my last video I shared that people have been asking me as I go to reenactment meetings, as I go to gun club meetings. You know, what is it that's motivating you to be here? And the answer is like, well, all of it, but it's really the history. And so, you know, call the channel Man About History. And apologies if, you know, you're more interested in the muskets. I've got some news on that. A couple of more firearms that have come my way in the last few weeks that I am still weeks away from even opening. But I'll give you a hint on that here in just a minute. Okay, friends, I'm going to interrupt myself here for a moment. I shot all this video and then I went to edit it, and I've discovered that I had some problems with it. I'm still going to show you most of the footage from the video, but the number one problem is I'm later going to put on a headlamp so that I can do this close-up sewing. I didn't realize it. It's an LED headlamp, and the frame rate of the camera does not line up with the frame rate of the light. And so even though in real life it looks like a flashlight, on the video it looks like a strobe light, and it's terribly annoying. So fair warning, when you get to that point, apologies in advance. I'll try to cut a lot of the unnecessary dialogue out. Some of it won't make as much sense because I'm going to drop out some of the conversation, just because, you know, 20 minutes of watching a strobe light on my head is not really how you want to spend a lot of time. That said, this excuse gives me the chance to insert some stuff that I saved actually to the end of the video before. I was like teasing you with, I'm going to tell you about 2 new firearms that I got. Well, I'm going to show them to you right now. First thing is this box. All right, yeah, I don't know if I'm allowed to show barcodes and stuff, but this is from Jim Kibler. Those of you who know the name, and you know what's in here, and it is screwed tight, and I will not be opening that for a couple of weeks. But when I do, I'm going to do an unboxing video, and you can be super excited about that. Other box, which I have actually peeked into, so its tape is broken, is a Pedersoli, there it is, Kentucky pistol, flintlock, 50 caliber. So that was the big surprise I was waiting to share at the end of the video, and you get to see it now. Expect more of those videos coming up in a couple of weeks. In the meantime, I'm going to give you the update on my sewing projects to recreate the attire of a middle-class Concord or Lexington, Massachusetts citizen from 1775. Stay tuned for that. But what you're going to see today is me giving you an update of where I am on the sewing project. And it is a sewing project. So imagine April 19th, 1775. It's still early spring. It's going to be relatively cold. And the men who were standing on Lexington Green waiting for 700 British British regulars to come marching from Cambridge, from Boston, across the water to Cambridge, through Monotony, into Lexington. They were there all night, and they kind of went into the Buckman Tavern and came out. Not sure, is this really going to happen? Was Paul Revere right when he said they're coming? Anyway, it's cold. And so they're not wearing linen, which they might have worn later in the year. They're wearing wool. So the new standards for participating in battle road reenactments, which go into effect this year, so 2023, 2 years ahead of the 250th celebration, which will happen as a very large-scale reenactment, I have a hunch, in just 2 years. The new standards that go into effect now is that you must have a wool weskit or waistcoat or vest, as we call it today. You must have a wool jacket, and you must have wool breeches. You can have a cotton shirt, would have been linen in the day, but they understand that you can't have all these materials. There's some controversy over this. Some people are upset about the new rules. Other people are diving in. And that's part of why they held the workshop, as best I can tell. The gentleman there who runs the park has been very generous to say, I know this is a lot to ask, but if you need to create new materials, because you've been using linen weskits or jackets for the last, or coats, sorry, for the last several years, and you've participated in the reenactment, that's no longer going to be valid. So, second requirement, they have to be, wherever visible, hand sewn. That's the other part of the deal that some people are a little rankled by. I'm not trying to make it seem like it's a huge controversy. It's not. People generally are in accord that this is what we should do. So these workshops were designed to teach people how to hand sew these things. You can use a machine on the internal seams if you want to, but most of it is not internal. Most of it you have to do by hand, or pay someone to have it done by hand, or hire someone. That's fine too, because I'm a man about history. I'm interested in actually doing it myself to learn how it was done, how to work the materials. So what I'm going to share with you today is how far I've gotten in the last month that I've been doing this. It's a little more than a month now. I don't have my knapsack here. That's kind of the baby project to get yourself going, understanding how to sew with linen, how to do a lot of the hand stitching that I've never done. I've only ever been a machine sewer my whole life, and even that only sporadically. So coming into this has been a real challenge in terms of my skills, in terms of learning really about the period and about what people would have done and would have worn and would have preferred. So very excited to show you where I gotten, and I'm going to let you watch me as I finish the last button that I'm going to put on the top part of my breeches. Breeches, you could say, depending on the accent of the region at the time. Breeches is how it's spelled. Breeches is how it might have been said, depending. This standard pattern is taken from actual breeches that have been preserved. Some of them are in museums. One of them is in the personal collection of Henry Cooke. One of the great things, honestly, about working with Henry is that not only does he know all this stuff because he studied it for 50 years, he has intimate knowledge of the fabrics. He's gone to garments that we can reliably date to this period. He has sketches that he's taken from garments that he is not allowed to take pictures of, but which he's allowed to sketch. And so he's got a piece from John Hancock. And so my breeches are modeled after that pattern. And it's just super exciting. But there's things about it that surprised me. Here's the waistband, this front part, and I'll do more detail on this later for anyone who's interested, but just so you get where I am. The waistband with 2 buttons on the top, could be a 3rd button down here. There are patterns that have a 3rd button. It's more common to have a 3rd button. In my case, I decided to not do it. This front here, remember this is pre-zipper. So you basically had to button and unbutton what's called the front fall in order to go to the bathroom. So your waistband stays attached, but you have this space now. That space is designed for, well, you guessed it. And it's lined with a linen lining on the inside, reinforced with linen facing or interfacing. But all of this buttoned together, and getting all of this right has been super challenging. I've progressed tremendously in my skills along the way, I'm very happy to say. Anyway, where we are today, this also has what are called flap pockets, this particular pattern. Okay, here's one of the things about modeling a period reenactment for a particular day. We're not talking about a year, we're talking a particular day, April 19th. You kind of have to pick which class of person you're going to have participate. Are you going to be a farmer? In which case you would have a different type of breeches. You would have a different fabric. So a farmer might have broadcloth. A farmer probably wouldn't have flap pockets because that would be sort of more expensive. See that? Nice flap pocket with a button that attaches it. I just attached this last button in the last 30 minutes. And the next button that I have to do, that I'll do with you watching, is this one on the opposite side. And I'll kind of explain to you how that's done. And then this top part will be done. I've got eyelets in the back that allow you to get lacing, which can be linen tape, it's called, or you can use leather, or you can use ribbon, and that ties in the bottom. So, you've seen maybe historical reenactment periods that have a lot of lacing for the women. Well, the men had lacing too. This is the backside, and it's got these holes here for the lacing to hold it tight or broad, depending on how your belly's doing that day, I guess. Although these are made to be worn under the belly. They're made to be worn on the hip bone. But still, you can still have swelling and growth and stuff, so you can tighter, looser. So, we have now these expandable waistlines on fancy clothes today, and well, this has been done for a long, long time. And then pleats on the back to create fullness for the rear end. Okay. Oh, I also put in a fob. Fob is the fancy name for a pocket that will hold a watch. Now, you don't call it a pocket watch because back then the only watches were pocket watches. So no one has to say, oh, by the way, that watch is made for your pocket, because all watches were made for your pocket. Pocket watches had been very reliable. The technology behind them was already 120, 30 years old at the time. And so pretty much anyone who was in the class I'm aiming for, sort of middle class, which might have been someone in Concord or Lexington who was a professional, maybe someone who was importing fabrics, someone who had a regional business to manage different grains or distribution or so on, not the actual farmers. So a farmer would have used broadcloth, maybe wouldn't have had a fob for a pocket watch or a watch, maybe wouldn't have had flat pockets on the outside either. But in all of that, the farmer would have had what's called broadcloth instead of what this is, which is called superfine wool. Superfine wool, broadcloth is made of wool as well. It's just not as treated to the same degree as this. You might not also have had these plackets on the front of the fall that add extra structure and strength to the fall. So you would have just had a simpler constructed garment, would have taken less stitching. You might not have had silk on the buttonholes. You might have just had linen thread on the buttonholes. So this is a middle-class person that I'm trying to aspire to. So I've got middle-class design, I've got a middle-class fabric, all of this under the supervision of Henry, who frankly makes all of this possible, because honestly I wouldn't know where to start with any of these decisions. And I'll include just a little clip in this video at the end, just so you can see what it's like to work in a workshop with Henry, because he's just so generous in helping everyone along. So I'm going to do this button. I'll do it while I'm talking about some things in general, about my next plans. So hopefully this is all going to work out. But here's the deal. I have been measuring this all along the way, making sure everything's lined up. I have a button here. Buttons in the time period would have usually been cloth-covered buttons. And I have this image probably from movies or TV shows or pictures of brass buttons and metal buttons with insignia on them and so on. And those are, of course, were possible, especially for military costume. But that wasn't the fashion in Massachusetts in the middle 1700s or 1770s. The fashion was generally cloth-covered buttons, and you can look at the paintings that were painted at the time of noble Bostonians, Philadelphians, and so on, and you'd see that really cloth buttons were all the rage. So a cloth button is made by taking a wood mold, just a little piece of wood. It looks like a small mint of wood. It's rounded on one edge, flat on the other edge. The hole in the middle is just because in order to make this, you have to put it on a lathe, and that hole is what's left over. You take a piece of your broadcloth or your superfine wool, and you're going to, through a process that I'm not going to show you because I've already done it, you would stitch a little bag around the wood and then draw it tight, and it creates, get this very tight and very well constructed button. You can't really see it. Black on black is the hardest to see. I've done a lot of black on black, and I've done a lot of this what's called Quaker buff or Quaker drab. And it's really hard to see here, but I mean, the fact that you can't see it, if you're looking at it sideways, tells you that I've done a pretty good job of making that button. It pulls the wool tight around the front and creates a very solid button. And then I'm going to show you how you attach this button. So this is the one we're going to attach. Got to get my linen thread. So we're using period materials, which I don't think you have to use linen thread in order to qualify. But of course, we're at the workshop hosted by Henry, so we're going to do linen thread. The linen thread comes unwaxed, and you're thinking, what do you mean unwaxed? Does that have something to do with bathing suits? Nope. It is just this wax, beeswax, which you get a chunk of beeswax and you just pull the thread through it alongside it using your thumb to create pressure against it. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna thread this needle. Now to do this, I have to admit that I'm old. So I'm gonna get geared up, and this will look a little humorous, apologies. I'm gonna use a headlamp. I learned this the hard way. As I'm getting older, it's not just my eyes don't focus super well, it's the seeing things, the contrast, black thread on black material, super hard to see. And so I've been using my running headlamp, which I use for running in the dark. One of the things that reenactors that I met have talked to me about is how many buttons you lose when you're doing reenacting. I mean, you're jumping over fences, you're running through fields, you're firing muskets and then taking cover. You're gonna lose some buttons, especially the ones that aren't placed super well. So I'm gonna try to place these super well so I don't lose them. But hey, you know what? If I lose them, I know how to make them again. It's a piece of wood, a piece of wool. So I'm gonna put the needle through to the other side and pull it through gently until I get to where the knot is holding up. Now, I'm going to go back through to the front and leave basically a small space that's going to be kind of like the cradle in the fabric for where the button's going to sit. All right, so on the back, I've got just that small stitch. On the front, I've now got this lead. What I'm going to do is put it through this button. Now remember, I have fabric gathered up and pulled tight around every side of the button. Hopefully this light isn't getting in your eyes. I'm going to just cut across. I'll try to do it so you can see. I'm going to cut across. Okay, had to go look for it. Here's my thimble. So I'm pushing the needle through, and all right, then we're going to pull that down. And the way this attaches, it's interesting. If you've ever seen how buttons are done, usually, and I've got some buttons here, maybe I could show them to you, but you can see a little shank on the button that that you would thread the thread through to attach it to the garment. And I was like, how am I supposed to do that here? I don't have a shank. Well, it turns out you don't need one. So I've pulled the button close to the material. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to thread back through that spot that we already have. And this allows me to now tighten the button against that spot. And we're going to go back through that spot. But this time, instead of looping through the button in the same crosswise pattern, we're basically making like a series of X's. So we went through the button backing at one angle, now we're going to go back at this angle, and then we're going to go back at that angle. So 3 of those pulled tight with this double thread is going to be enough to hold the button in place, and it's going to hold it solidly in place. The button's not going to dangle. So now I've gone back through the fabric again. So I went through the back of the button. Now I'm doing another loop into the fabric, and now I'll do one more at a different angle. If I can remember what angles I've already done. Here we go. 3 of those at 3 different angles creates a very tight hold against the fabric. And now I am almost done. There's the button. There's where it's attached. Now what do? Create a thread shank. So you basically have the button looped like this. I'm going to go around it 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's YouTube videos that were shared with me about how to do that. Now basically you're created a thread shank in here, which is black on black, so you're not going to be able to see it, but the thread shank means now I have this tight circle binding all of those threads together, and I'm going to go through that thread shank twice. Okay, there we go. Went through once, and I'll go through again at a different angle, 90 degrees to the original one, and that is it. Now look at that. It stands up nice and strong. It's not going to dangle or wobble. And let me snip that off. And we have my last flap pocket. And it buttons through the silk buttonhole like that. So that is the completed front. All the buttons in place. These big ones here also cloth covered with a silk buttonhole. Very big buttonholes, but very excited to finish these off. Now they're not done because I'll have to finish the legs, and the bottom of the leg is going to have 4 more buttons on each leg, and it's going to involve tapering the bottom underneath the knee the whole kit, when I get it all assembled, I'll certainly make a video and show you how it all fits together. It involves wool stockings, which I am not going to hand knit. That takes like 100 hours for someone who's not a professional. I bought those. I have a linen shirt. I have leather shoes and buckles. I have a cartridge box that I'll sling over my shoulder. I have a beaver felt hat coming. All of these things, all part of my effort to understand what it is that people lived like and how they experienced it. So I promised I would share this. Proof that I like buttons. 12 silk buttons on my waistcoat. Buttonholes, the buttons, look at those. There's no dangle in those buttons. They're nice and tight. And I have a cravat. I've got pockets sewn on here. This is the only thing on this that I did not personally hand sew is this dog leg. This dog leg stitch, which Henry demonstrated to a number of us how to do when we were at that stage in making the waistcoats, waistcoats, vests. And he did that. I said, oh, Henry, I'm never going to wash that, so I'll always remember that you did that. But he's teasing a little bit. But the fact is you don't actually wash wool because it'll ruin it. You let it season, you let it stretch, you let it shape to fit your body because it's a natural fabric and it will shape over the wear. A typical man might have had 2 waistcoats in middle-class New England. They might have had a wool one for the winter season. They might have had a linen one for the summer season. They might have had an extra wool one for fancy events if they ever went into Parliament or anything like that. Now, they also would have worn a coat. And I have not begun the coat yet. So to the point where I have almost everything assembled. The coat will be black as well. This is all the same material, the same quality of superfine wool. I'm going to make a black coat that will fit it as well. So very excited to get all this together. Now, as promised, I am going to share with you what else I'm doing. In the last few weeks, I've received 2 shipments that I think you're going to be interested in. You know, I've had to make some decisions about what direction I want my experience to go. I'm really doubling down on Patriots Day, 1775, April 19th, if I haven't repeated that enough. I'm doubling down on that because there's just too much variability if I decide to go in other directions. I did go out to the Springfield Arsenal or Armory as I've done a video on that. I do recommend that you see that video if you haven't seen it, and that you go out there someday. It's just remarkable. But that arsenal isn't even made until 1794 is when it's commissioned, and 1795 is when the model 1795 musket, based on the Charleville musket, is created out there in Springfield, and we begin production of our own domestic military weapons. The challenge for me is like, okay, where do I go next? Do I get a Charleville? And I really considered it. Saw a lot of videos about Charleville, about how they compare to the Brown Bess, which I have, and I decided that, you know, another musket that just is configured a little bit differently, although an interesting project, wasn't going to scratch some of the itches I was feeling. So at recommendation of a couple of viewers, I actually went ahead and ordered a Kentucky rifle. This is in the pattern of the 1760s, so it's the kind of rifle that a rifleman would have had. Now, a Bostonian would not have had one of these rifles. Typically made in Pennsylvania, but named Kentucky Rifles. It was sort of the brand that they absorbed. Because Kentucky back then sort of meant the frontier. The Ohio River Valley wasn't even settled yet, so like Kentucky was as far a remote wilderness as people were contemplating at the time. And so calling it a Kentucky rifle was basically saying someone who lives out in the countryside who might wear, you know, buckskin clothing and leggings instead of this stuff. They're not wearing superfine wool in Kentucky, not except in the cities. And so I have ordered and received now, although I haven't opened it. I'm going to save that for a video. A Kentucky rifle. I'll share more of why I want to try that. Partly it's about accuracy. I want to see how differently a rifle barrel delivers lead in the 1770s. I also really want to get into the story of the riflemen who came up after the April 19th Patriots Day events on Battle Road, because by June we brought several riflemen up from the South to help with what became Bunker Hill and then the Siege of Boston. And there's so much interesting history there. So I'm still considering it my Boston project because the riflemen did come up, and I want to experience that. Now, the second shipment that I got is a Pedersoli replica pistol, smooth bore muzzle loading pistol. Again, not something that the average person in Boston would have had, but I also have read enough about the people who were the majors, the commanders of some of the colonial forces were likely to have them because they felt like they needed them for their position, especially if they were going to be mounted on horseback. It was very common for someone to have a shorter weapon that they could brandish from the back of the horse. So I've got that. I haven't unboxed that either. So look forward to 2 videos coming up probably in the next 3-4 weeks where I will unbox those. I've got to do the finish on both of them. It's going to be boiled linseed oil this time. Again, a recommendation of some of you viewers who have said to me, like, yeah, nice of you to get into this, James, but if you really want to go full in, you treat the wood with boiled linseed oil. So excited to try all of that. And I will document it along the way, do a little more of a traditional unboxing, and give you a sense of what this experience is like. So on the weapons side, while I'm working on all that, I'll keep working on the clothing side. This April 19th, I'm not planning to participate in the reenactment. There's a lot of preparation that has to go in. You have to participate in a bunch of drills that I just don't have time for. I'm going to be traveling for some of these things. And so I thought, I'll go as a spectator and I'll get pictures and I'll maybe interview some folks, share those things with you as well. The rule is going to be, if you want to participate in the reenactments in 2025, the 250th anniversary, you will have had to have participated either this year or next year in order to be on the short list, because there's going to be a long list of people who want to participate. Got the warning for the battery. It just died on me. I had to swap in another one that's also about to die. So that's my sign that I'm done here. But anyway, I'll go to the reenactments this year, do some interviews, share some of that video with you. Very excited to kind of learn more about it and prepare myself to be able to participate in the future as I get kitted up in all of these different ways. Love learning about this stuff. Love everyone's input. Sorry again if this one that doesn't have any weapons in it, no gunpowder, no cartridges, nothing, isn't to your liking. But anyway, thanks for your attention. I'm going to finish with just a little clip of a video of Henry showing us some of his sewing technique, and you get a sense of his generous spirit and what an enjoyable time we had in all those workshops. Big thanks to the National Park Service. Good morning. Here I am at the Major John Buttrick home in Concord, Massachusetts. This is just up the hill from the Old North Bridge. Major Buttrick was the one who issued the famous quote here, "Fire, fellow soldiers, for God's sake, fire." Very dramatic moment right after Isaac Davis and Abner Hosmer were fired upon, and that became the first official declaration of fire that is considered the shot heard around the world, because it was essentially treason, and that treason was backed up and turned into Revolutionary War history. I'm here at the Buttrick home because we're going to today begin a workshop in making 18th century breeches. I'm getting ready for possibly participating in reenactments this year in preparation for the 250th anniversary of the shot heard around the world. It's going to be very exciting. I'm working with Henry Cooke. He does a lot of outfitting for famous mannequins in museums and such, and he generously offers his time for these workshops that several of us have signed up today to participate in. So very excited. I don't know how much I'll be able to film on the inside, but I'll at least give you shots of the works in progress so you can see what I accomplished.
But we're going to cut down about 1/4 inch, then apply the waistband, and we want to leave a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I like to work this from the inside of the garment so I can see what I'm doing and what the effects are going to be. But the first part is we're going to pin the waistband along from the center front out towards the side. And we're going to get to the far edge of the bear where I made that slit. which is now going to be the pocket rising out of the waist of the breeches. And where we've made that slit, I'm also going to slip into the pocket bag. Slit the pocket and then folded that edge down. As you can see on the other side, you can see where it's folded down and pressed open. So we start, I got a knot in the thread, pull the pin out. We're doing what is known as a rabattre or underhand stitch. Rabattre sous la main is the French name. Other people call it the fancy stitch, the reverse whip stitch. It goes by many weird names. To finish this off, to finish this portion of the construction, you then will drop down with a couple of running stitches and do a row of running stitch or spaced back stitch, which is just back stitch with little spaces between them. I would suggest running stitch. It's just easier and quicker, but just do small stitches with spaces in between to catch a second row, and that's actually acting as what they refer to as stay stitching. It's going to keep this curved edge from stretching out of shape.